Welcome everyone to the inaugural seminar for our Water, Wetlands, and Watershed seminar series for fall 2021. It's great to see a bunch of you here in Zoom land, as well as everyone out there in YouTube, on YouTube, I guess, wherever you happen to be or watching it recorded. It's a strange semester for all of us, but we're really pleased to be hosting a really nice number of baker's dozen, so 13 amazing speakers this semester. A lot of focus on coastal ecosystems, but really broadly across water policy, watershed management, and a lot of focus on nutrients and really how to improve water quality through sort of very directed action. So we're excited both about the science and about hopefully the implications for management and policy. And today, so everybody who's on here in the Zoom room, it is recording, so you're welcome, of course, so just know that you're being recorded. We'll be happy to take questions at the end, and everyone out in YouTube, there's a chat in there where you can add questions to the YouTube chat and we'll transfer them in here to Dr. Who. So let me please introduce our first speaker of the semester. This is Chuanmin Hu. Chuanmin is currently a professor of optical oceanography at the University of South Florida. His research uses laboratory field and remote sensing to study marine algal blooms. And he takes pains to note harmful algal blooms, of course, but also non-harmful blooms, macroalgae and microalgae, and also using the same kind of techniques to look at other coastal hazards like oil spills and in general water quality and global change. He's published over 300 papers on these topics and a member of several of NASA and NOAA satellite missions. He's also a member of the Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine of Florida. So Chuanmin, Dr. Who, it's great to have you here today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning, everyone. So let me share my screen now. I hope it still works.
I'll let you know. All right, we see it. Perfect, looks great.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. So this work is actually from a collaboration with many people. I don't have time to mention all their names, but it's been a work for many years. First, let me introduce my lab, because you introduced myself. So this is actually an old photo. We took almost 10 years ago. So I always remind myself, I need to update, But currently the lab is about the same size. We have about 12 to 15 people, depending on the number of students, number of postdocs. So we do all kinds of field, lab and remote sensing work to study the ocean, especially the coastal ocean, using optical means. So that means the optical measurements, modeling, and remote sensing. So we try to understand how the coastal water quality has changed in the past few decades and what caused the changes. But today, I want to shift the gear to another phenomenon, a recent phenomenon. It's not about water quality, but about macroalgae floating on the ocean surface. Right? So in short, I want to talk about green tides and golden tides. But first, what are these tides? So here I have several photos taken from a published paper. So these are the examples of green tides and golden tides all around the world, from France, China, the Caribbean, and the US. And you see, these are very dense macroalgae or seaweed mats in coastal oceans or on the beaches. So these are the tides. Now, if we zoom in a certain region, first let's look at the green tides of Qingdao, China. So this green tide was or became well known back in 2008 because of a practice of an Olympic sailing game. all those reporters from different countries gather around this practice field. Then all of a sudden, these athletes are surrounded by the green tides, and it became world news. But this green tide did not start from 2008. I'm going to show you later. So this tide actually in that year caused huge problems, not for the Olympic sailing game, but for the environment and for fisheries and for economy. The local governmental agencies spent millions of dollars by deploying booms or deploying boats to physically remove this macroalgae. And you see the individual macroalgae plant has about 20 centimeter long. It's like a filament. They float on the water surface because they have bubbles inside. So that's a green tide of China. And next is an example of the golden tide, and some people call it brown tides. Depending on the age of the plant, they may appear yellowish or brownish. And here is the location. The circle is the East China Sea. So on the surface, they appear like that. It's very dense. And on the beach, they can cause pollution. But this type of golden tide is from a macroalgae called Sargassum horneri, which usually grows on the bottom of rocks. But once you have high winds or storms, the strong ocean currents may disturb this macroalgae or seaweed, and then they float on the surface. They don't die, they keep growing on the surface. Because you have more light on the surface, they grow faster, then they become a huge bloom, causing problem. But usually, this is good on the bottom, and people actually grow this, for different purposes. So now back in our backyard in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Atlantic Ocean, we also have this type of a golden tides, which are from Sargassum horneri. Sargassum fluitans and the Sargassum natans. These are the two main species of Sargassum in the Gulf. Okay? And when they are scattered around, a clump here, a clump there, or a small mat, these are very good. These are the ocean habitats for many marine animals. And because of this, if you want to harvest this, you want to collect this seaweed in the US waters, the EEZ, you need to have a permit. Otherwise, you have trouble with the NOAA. NOAA, you need a permit from NOAA. So that's a very good habitat for that. But once you have too much of this seaweed, okay, before I move forward. So individual clumps would appear like this. To the left, that's a Sargassum fluitan. To the right, that's Sargassum natan. They are about a size of your hand. It's about 10 centimeter wide. But under wind, under currents, they may gather around ocean fronts to form large rafts. Sometimes that can be hundreds of kilometers wide, long, and kilometers wide, huge mats. And under ocean currents and tides, they may be washed on the beaches to give you a huge problem, all kinds of problems. And this is what exactly happened in the Caribbean in the past 10 years, not just last year or this year. Okay. So to the left, that's a picture from the Caribbean Sea. To the right, that's a picture from Texas coast. Okay. And so you can imagine once you have a huge amount of seaweed in your coastal water, on your beach, you have all kinds of problems. Once they sink to the bottom, if you have seagrass or corals in the shallow water on the ocean bottom, but all of a sudden you have a dead seagrass mat that will smother everything, creating a local dead zone. So in that regard, although none of these seaweeds is toxic, and many times they are considered as harmful algal blooms. They are harmful to many things. And they create also problems to sailors. You see, my friend Dirk Oren is strangled in this huge mess. Who use a binocular to find out which way to go, to get rid of this, because this seaweed gets tangled with the propeller. Okay, and they also clog the intake of many power plants cooling system. So here are some more photos from the Caribbean, many from the Caribbean. You can see the problem of how local people suffer from this. Now, we are scientists. We don't just look at the pictures. We want to have a large picture in both space and time. We want to understand, okay, when did this problem occur? And how did the problem change over the past years? And what caused this? Can we predict this? And is there any way we can mitigate or adapt to this? We have all kinds of questions. How do they impact the ocean biogeochemistry, for example? But without data, you can only speculate, right? But if you don't go there, collect the data, what can you do with this? Now we have satellites for the past 30 years. Even if we don't have a field data in a certain place, we can go back with the satellites to look at a certain region, to form a time series, to understand what's going on in the past decades. And this is what we did in the past few years. Now, how exactly did we do that? There are a lot of tricks we call algorithms. Okay? That takes a huge amount of effort because we have clouds, we have sun gleams, and this seaweeds, although they are large on the beach, to a satellite image, they are very small. Okay? So we have to play a lot of tricks. And here, I just want to show the concept of how we do this. Here's the image you can grab online. It shows the coverage of Gulf of Mexico. And you see clouds, you see the ocean, you see land. But what we see is different after we apply the algorithms. And here is what we see. So what are those colored dots? These are the detected sargassum seaweed locations and abundance. The color shades indicate abundance, with a warm color indicating higher abundance. Okay? So that's a composite image of a few days. And we can do this for the past 20 years. Think about the power of this. Now, if we apply this technique to those green tides and golden tides and see how they evolve in the past decades, and here's what we got for the green tides. And I just show a few examples for this 4 years, but you can see the evolution of different years. They kept growing. And going back to 2000, that's almost 20 years. This green tide did not start until 2008, and in recent years, there's an increasing trend. Now, I have a new figure. I don't have it here, but I do have a new figure up to this year. It's continued this trend. And now if we go to the golden tide in East China Sea, we see the same thing. And on the top, I have images to showing the sequence within 3 months of 2017. This is in early March. The seaweed is right here. In early April, it's bigger and it moved. In May, it's even bigger. And in June, it started to decline. That shows the seasonal sequence. But if we go back to the past 20 years, again, we see almost nothing before 2011, but all of a sudden they appeared here. Now moving to another golden tide. So in 2019, we published a paper to show this golden tide is continuous from the West Africa here to the Gulf of Mexico. And this is a huge, this is 8,000 kilometers in size. And also the amount of seaweed is huge, it's 20 million tons in its peak months. If we put them all together, so they're scattered, here and there, it's not continuous. Even if you see a continuous red dot, if you go there with a boat, you don't see everywhere. You see this clump, so here and there. Okay, we just put them together in images so you can visualize. But if we do put them together in one place, how large is this? It's a 6,000 kilometers square everywhere. If we just aggregate them together, 6,000 kilometers square, that's a 6 times of Tampa Bay size. Tampa Bay is 1,000 kilometers square. So that's the huge. If you get a tiny portion of this on your beach, okay, you have a huge problem. So that's the distribution in the peak months. We call this the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt. It's a belt. And if we look back in history, it did not start until 2011. Okay. Before 2011, there's almost nothing. And now there's an increasing trend. If we amend this series using this year and last year, it's somewhere here. It's still big. So this is interesting because if we look at ocean properties, any property, you name it, surface temperature, chlorophyll, water clarity, or light availability, pH, oxygen, you just name it. They cycle, they may have some small change in history, okay? But nothing like this killing curve of the CO2, right? So what we observe from the macroalgae is not like any ocean property or the atmosphere property. It's not a stable annual cycle or continuous change, but before a certain year, there's almost nothing. So they appear after a certain year, then they increase. And if we put all those 3 green and golden tides together, and you see they are almost synchronized. So before 2008, there's almost nothing. Then somewhere around here, they started to appear, then they increase. Now, what is the reason behind this? Do we have a regime shift in the ocean or what? Okay. So when I first put these 3 graphs together, I thought, wow, do they respond to something in common? So now if we look at the exact reasons behind each phenomenon, for the first case, what caused the green tide in Qingdao, off Qingdao? So now we know they are caused by the local aquaculture of another type of seaweed. So they grow the aquaculture, the seaweed, nori. If you go to a sushi bar, people use nori to wrap the sticky rice for sushi. So they grow this. But at the same time they grow this, the Ulva macroalgae also grow on the rocks. So when people harvest the nori seaweed, they abandon the Ulva seaweed in the water. And this abandoned seaweed is moved by ocean currents to clear water, relatively clear water. Then they have enough sunlight. Then they have enough nutrients in coastal water. They just grow crazy, 15, 20% a day, the growth rate. Okay. Now, why did we not have this before 2008? Well, because the seaweed aquaculture was minimum before that year. So we know that. So that's a human activity. Okay. So what happened to the golden tide of East China Sea? It's similar, but this time it's a mixture of both human activity and climate change. So again, along this coast, people grow seaweed. It's a different type of seaweed. And this golden this Sargassum hornery also grow with the seaweed. And plus, there's a natural population on the bottom of rocks along this coast of this Sargassum hornery. And on the winds, high winds, under storms, this bottom growing seaweed or sargassum, they float on the surface. They keep growing. But why did we have this 2017 seaweed bloom? Because in 2017, the ocean is super warm in the growing season, not in the summer. The growing season is in spring. So in the spring, the ocean is 1 degree warmer than usual. And this type of seaweed prefers a certain temperature range to grow. And that spring warming favors the seaweed growth. So we know the reason. Now, under a changing climate, if the ocean keeps this warming trend, we may have more seaweed, sargassum seaweed, just in this region. But remember, in 50 years, the ocean will just warm for ½ degree or 1 degree. So it's the annual fluctuation right now is more important than the long-term warming. Because annual fluctuation is more than 1 degree. Now for the Atlantic Ocean, what caused the sargassum golden tide back in 2011? There are many hypotheses, including dust deposition, the Amazon River plume discharge, and ocean circulation, ocean upwelling, because they all bring nutrients to feed the sargassum seaweed. Of all these hypotheses, this is perhaps the most plausible one, because if you look at the ocean circulation back in 2010, 1 year before this 2011 sargassum bloom. Okay. What happened in 2010? That's a 100 event of anomaly in this multi-decadal Atlantic oscillation. It's a negative phase here. It's more negative than any previous years. You can see this, right? Okay. So this negative phase, okay, is associated with stronger winds and stronger ocean currents in this Sargasso Sea to the east. So you have stronger currents to the east to bring the sargassum population from the Sargasso Sea to the east and following the coastal currents, then to this tropical Atlantic. So once this sargassum seed population are in the tropical Atlantic, they have enough sunlight. The ocean temperature is always high, so they have a favorable environment to grow. So that explains why 2011 was the first year. But what caused the subsequent year fluctuations from year to year? We have some hypotheses again, but nothing is concrete. The reason is this is not like a Tampa Bay or the Big Bang. The ocean is huge and they are connected. If you look at the different ocean regions, there's a central, the east, or west, okay? You can't just focus on one region and say, oh, in this region, I have a growing trend. Well, the growing trend may be something transported from another place. So we did a lot of simulations to see how each ocean region, subregion, is connected to each other in different time frame. Okay? And we concluded, most of this sargassum here is self-sustained, more than 90%. They just cycle here. But the sargassum in the Caribbean is mostly transported from this region. Okay? And the sargassum in the Gulf of Mexico is also transported from this region. So that's the ocean the ocean circulation hypothesis. Okay? what you see in one region is from another region. Now, what about the nutrients? There are different nutrient sources, and here's one of them. This is not the only nutrient contributors, but one of them. It's restricted to a local region affected by the Amazon River plume, but you can see in the past 20 years, the deforestation rate in the Amazon forest has increased compared to other years. So what's the consequence of this deforestation? That you have soil erosion. And this eroded soil is in the river, and the river plume discharges this nutrient-rich soil in the coastal ocean. And plus, the use of fertilizer in Brazil has also increased by more than 60% compared to 1 decade ago. So all these numbers will contribute to more nutrient flux to in the Amazon River discharge. Now, if we plot the Amazon River discharge nutrient flux, that's the blue bars, from a monitoring station, you see in recent years, the nutrient discharge of flux is much higher than in previous years. Although the timing is not exactly the same as the sargassum growth, but it's in the general trends. They agree with each other. The eutrophication by coastal nutrient discharge is also confirmed by the nutrient composition of sargassum tissues. My colleague, Brian Lapointe of FAU, collected lots of sargassum samples and analyzed the samples in the lab for the nutrient content composition from the 1980s to the recent years. And after partitioning the data into 2 groups, you can see the difference between the relative nutrient composition in sargassum tissues. And in recent years, we have more nitrogen. We have less phosphorus. And the nitrogen to phosphorus ratio, the NP ratio. Okay. And for phytoplankton, the global average ratio is about 16:1. And for the sargassum tissue, the ratio is much higher. And it's also much higher than 30 years ago. So that is a nitrogen eutrophication. So that's for many examples. But now, if you ask me, so what exactly causes the annual fluctuation? Some years you have more, some years you have less. I still can't answer, although the general consensus is there's a eutrophication from coastal discharge and possibly from the dust deposition. But I cannot answer from year to year. But even though we can do many things, even though we cannot understand it completely, we can still monitor and have a short-term prediction based on history and based on real-time observations. And next, I'm going to show you how we do this exactly. And this is an animation for monthly composite of sargassum distribution. So I stop for maybe 20 seconds. You can visualize this. Okay. So from this animation, you can see they have a monthly change, they have a seasonal cycle, but generally they move from the east to the west. Okay. Now, from this historical analysis, we can form a statistics-based short-term forecast. And this is what we are doing right now. We have been doing this for 3 years, more than 3 years. So every month, by end of the day, we just did this yesterday, actually. We now cast what's going on in the past months, and we forecast what will happen in next few months. Okay, we distribute this monthly one-page sargassum bulletin, okay, to give people a general outlook and on what's going on in the large region. But if you ask me what will happen in my beach, I cannot say anything, okay, because local processes like winds, tides, and currents drive what's going on next month. But even though we can still provide a large picture that is useful to many people. For example, here is a weekly composite. We have this type of image every day online, and we update them every day. Okay? The coverage is shown to the left. It covers the entire Gulf of Mexico. And this is the image to show how sargassum is transported from the Caribbean to the Gulf of Mexico, following the loop current to make a circle to reach the Florida Keys and to reach the east coast of Florida. And this is why the east coast of Florida, Miami Beach, Palm Beach, they receive a lot of sargassum. Now, if we focus on a certain region, like this EZ of Mexico, Caribbean coast here, and we can look at the time series to tell the local people what is the trend and what is the current situation just for that neighborhood. And people also rely on the real-time imagery online to find the sargassum mats to determine where to release the young turtles, because this is the habitat for turtle. If you release this young turtle in open water without habitat, the survival rate is low. So they want to find this. And they use satellite image to help find this. So this is the practical use of the real-time image. And further, we can do science with the sargassum data. And here is a comparison between the sargassum carbon fixation, the brown symbol, and the carbon fixation by phytoplankton in the sargassum belt and in the entire Atlantic Ocean. This is the log scale. You can see, yes, sargassum carbon fixation is lower than that from phytoplankton, but it's not negligible. It's a few percent, 10% or something. It's a huge amount. And people also use the sargassum seaweed to make products. And you can Google online. I found this interesting. They make bricks, which are then used to build a house and to make shoes and to make a farm. When you swim around sargassum, they are not toxic. You will find fish, turtle underneath. And same with this algae. Okay. Now, what's the future? Well, many people, not just my group, many people are working on this, all these different kinds of seaweed, yellow, green tides and golden tides, with both scientific research and management practices. And this is one activity we are currently carrying in our lab. So we want to zoom in to individual beaches. Very frequently we are asked, what's going on Miami Beach, for example? With the previous images, they are based on coarse resolution satellite data. They cannot be zoomed in. But now we have a higher resolution satellite data. It's a 3-meter resolution. It's like flying a drone on your beach almost every day. So now we have such a capacity. We can zoom in on individual beaches to tell the likelihood of sargassum beaching events. And this is from Miami Beach, North Miami Beach, and Catherine Beach. And we can form the time series in a short time frame and inform people of the amount of sargassum that is likely to get on the beach. So this is one activity we are trying to do to make the products more relevant to coastal residents. Now, with all of this, I want to provide a summary again on the rising green tides and the golden tides. So both Ulva and Sargassum of different species in the Yellow Sea, East China Sea, and Atlantic show dramatic increases in recent years, indicating a possible regime shift. The regime shift might or might not be related to the ocean property shift, but it's a combination of human activity and climate change. Okay? It can be both natural and unnatural. Okay? But the exact reason behind the Great Atlantic Sargassum Bed are still unclear, and many people are working on this, trying to solve the puzzle. Okay? But after all, these recurrent blooms may become a new norm. That's what we predicted in the past few years. And that's what happened in the past few years. And then they call for more studies and management actions. Okay? And there are also actually many opportunities to do research, to make products for commercial use and for business. So from this, I think I presented enough for questions, and I welcome your questions. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Please give a virtual animated round of applause or a real one. You're welcome to unmute. Nice job. Thanks so much, Dr. Hu. Yeah, it's amazing to see the sort of scope of research across species, across like parts of the world, and of course across scales from very local scale applications to entire Atlantic sort of circulation. So it's really impressive, and yeah, quite an amazing set of work. So I see we have some questions in the room. So I see the first hand up is Dr. Thomas Bianchi, and then Christine, you'll be next if you're still on. So Tom, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Really great talk. I really enjoyed seeing that, and familiar with Brian's work as well. I have one question and one comment. The question is, you talked about the input of nutrients from the Amazon, but I'm curious to know how important the really immense nitrogen atmospheric and fluvial inputs off the Yangtze are impacting some of those blooms, much, much larger than the Amazon. That's the question for the East China Sea. And the one, a comment regarding sort of the dynamics once these sargassum blooms, so to speak, get in the Gulf of Mexico is, have you looked at the importance of these warm core eddies that are largely responsible for why these things, I suspect, wind up in the western part of the Gulf of Mexico by Texas? These are very common that spin off of the Florida Loop Current and can entrain material towards the Western Gulf. I don't know if you've thought about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. These are great questions. By the way, it's nice to see you again.
And Chuanmin, please excuse me, I accidentally turned off your camera, but you're welcome to turn it back on. So as the host, I messed up and I turned you off. So there you are. Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. So first, well, if I don't answer these questions in a complete way, we can always chat offline. On the Yangtze River, that's a great point. We did look at the time series of Yangtze River discharge. The thing is, they pretty much, their annual cycles and the anomalous years in the Sargassum hornery blooms do not coincide with anomalous years of Yangtze River discharge. So it's like they have different cycles. They behave in different ways. Okay? So we think, temperature is primarily a reason, in addition to the human activities there. It's the warming, annual fluctuation in temperatures. That's the physiology of the Sargassum horn. Okay? On the 80 transport, that's a great point. Unfortunately, I do not have answer. We have been looking at 80s, trying to generate 80 statistics on both the warm core and the cold core 80s, not just in the Gulf of Mexico, but also in the the Amazon plume region. That's a retroflexion, a lot of huge rings there, and also in the Caribbean. I do not have answer, but what I can say is in the Western Gulf of Mexico, there appears to be a separate population than this Caribbean transported sargassum.
Oh.
And in some years, they appear to be isolated. So without the Caribbean transport, we still see large amount of sargassum in the Western Gulf of Mexico in certain years. So this is really a puzzling thing. So when I said Amazon River plume discharge, that's restricted to local, because the discharge is only restricted to west of 50-degree west longitude or something, or 45 degrees. But in the Gulf of Mexico, we do have Mississippi River. So a natural question would be, what is the potential impact of that river to the Gulf of Mexico? And we did some correlation studies, not on the process level, but the correlation studies to look at how sargassum in the Western Gulf of Mexico in the past 20 years changed versus how the Mississippi River discharge changed. And we did not have a good result, to my surprise, especially in some huge amount sargassum years for the Western Gulf of Mexico. That's 25 and 2014. Those are huge years. The Mississippi River is not that huge. But we're really puzzled. So there are different reasons. And my thought is we are perhaps touching just a few tips or size of a giant elephant now, and we don't have a complete picture. So this is something we're working on. I feel sorry I can't have a more definitive answer on that.
No, that's great. Thank you. Just one comment. I'm not surprised about the Mississippi. Most of that nitrogen stripped out very quickly close to the coast where the hypoxic region is. And you're not going to see much of a signature out in deeper water. But your answers were very good. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chuanmin. We've got a question from Christine and then one from YouTube from Natalie. So go ahead, Christine.
All right, great. Thanks. This is so fun to see your work. Thanks for presenting today, Chuanmin. My question, I'm going to start with the second question that I had because I think it's more interesting and I want to hear your answer to it, which is, I imagine there's a huge amount of nutrient transport that's happening as a function of this mass movement of biomass. And my question is about whether you see cascading effects of that once the biomass from, the sargassum kind of breaks down. Do you see a secondary kind of bloom or secondary productivity that takes on at the tail end of these sargassum blooms? Or what happens there in terms of all that locked up, basically organic nutrient material that's ultimately transported across the ocean?
Well, that requires a proposal.
Okay. Yeah.
Great question. So the short answer is I have not seen a post-sargassum bloom in the phytoplankton. So what happened to the sargassum carrying the nutrient carried by sargassum? Well, once the sargassum dies, they sink to the bottom. They're degraded. They're utilized by bacteria. Some of the nutrient may be recycled. Tom is an expert on that. I'm not a nutrient person, but I did not see this nutrient recycling effect to stimulate phytoplankton growth. But we did see the release of CDAM, color dissolved organic matter, by sargassum. We measured CDAM within the sargassum mat, and a little bit far away, the difference is big. So that's the CDAM release. And a lot of people are arguing sargassum may be used to mitigate some of the climate change impact by carbon fixation, carbon sequestration. in the local region, it may be the case, because although the carbon fixation, as I showed in the graph, it's just a few percent, 10–20% of phytoplankton, but sargassum sinks much faster than phytoplankton. So a larger proportion of sargassum can sink to the ocean bottom than phytoplankton. So if we think about the carbon sequestration, the sargassum proportion may be higher than few percent. As to how much higher, I have no idea. Okay. So these are biogeochemistry questions. We're trying to address. But honestly, we wrote a couple of proposals. They are all rejected.
I was curious if you're seeing anything pop up on a remote sensing perspective that would give you some clues. So,
no.
All right, so I'll translate to Natalie Nelson's question. She said, "Thank you so much for the great presentation. I was surprised to see the short-term variation in sargassum on beaches as identified from the high-resolution images shown near the end of the presentation. What are the main drivers of the short-term variation in sargassum rock on beaches, or your hypotheses about that?"
Tides and winds, especially winds. If we can't predict winds for a couple of days, we just can't predict exactly where the sargassum will land. Mm-hmm. We can predict the general outlook. As long as they're alive, they don't die. They're somewhere, right? For the large region. But will they land on Miami Beach or North Miami Beach? That really depends on wind. Okay. We can't really predict wind. The coastal circulation, the models, it's really, really difficult.
All right, that's great. Thanks. And seems like a active area of getting to the beach level research. Okay, so another question from Eric Milbrandt, who's also on YouTube. Hello, there can be allelopathic interactions among plant species. I'm wondering if you've looked at Karenia blooms versus macroalgae in the open ocean, and do they overlap?
Mostly, no.
Okay. All right.
So sargassum is restricted to the mostly western Gulf of Mexico. Karenia bloom, they are mostly related to the West Florida Shelf. There are Karenia blooms to the west Gulf of Mexico along Texas Beach or Mexican Beach, but I haven't found cases when both blooms coincide in same location, same period.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions? We're running sort of in our last minute here. I'll let anybody from our sort of room here unmute if you have any final questions. And if not,
yeah, people can always ask me questions offline. I know that there could be many more questions. For example, people can, I received countless email messages. One couple even asked me, next April we're gonna have our wedding on Chuanmin Beach. Can you tell me is the good time to fly there? I said, oh, I'm sorry. I can't.
It's a tall order. Okay, well, thank you so much. This was a really awesome way to kick off this semester. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak to all of us and inspire our students and faculty here. So thank you so much, Chuanmin, and best of luck in the semester. Take care. Thank you.
All.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Thanks. I'm just going to wrap it, make sure everything gets wrapped up here. Okay. So exciting. Are you continuing on with your green tide work, Chuanmin? Is that carrying forward?
We are continuing the work for all those 3 types of tides.
Okay.
Because there are just so many unknowns.
Yeah.
And they're interesting. They can tie different disciplines. You name it.
Yeah.